Welcome to the Journey to Union podcast.
I'm Alex.
I'm Kate.
This is a podcast about growing healthy relationships, learning how to live in truth, light, and love with self and other. So, yes, this is the final part of our 3-part introductory podcasts about kintsugi, phoenix, and truth. As that implies, this is the third and final one about truth. So, Kate, where shall we start with truth and what that means in context of what we've been talking about and the journey to sacred union, I suppose?
Okay, so the journey to sacred union is truth. It's about how you move through a point where truth has failed or not existed, through to making a new choice, and then to living in truth, which is what we're going to talk about in this podcast. And truth, firstly, can be a very blunt tool, can't it? And truth is a very powerful tool, but with it comes responsibility. And I think we both agree that we are totally responsible for our truth, and we are responsible for sharing and speaking our truth, but we're not responsible for how people receive and what they do with that truth. But as we've learnt with each other and in living this way, actually what you are responsible for is not only speaking your truth, but also delivering it in a way where you are emotionally intelligent and you are conscious of the ripples that that is going to have on the other person that you're speaking to and generally the wider context.
Yeah. I think that's a fairly articulate way of saying that. I mean, living in truth, yes, it is living in truth with yourself, speaking that as well as living by that, I think more so. How often do we allow people or institutions or, the wider society to dictate what we do in life? And I think that's just as much living in truth, is choosing, like you say, what your life looks like. And that might mean sometimes having to do difficult or hard things, but it also means, doing those things that actually fulfill you. I think that's a good introduction.
Is everyone always ready for your truth?
No, probably not. No, some people can't handle the truth. We said lots of movies. You don't know Spider-Man, but the great power, great responsibility to Spider-Man quote. And we've just quoted Scarface there as well. I think it is can't handle the truth. But no, I think that's where some people can't. Some people are quite sensitive to the world, and truth does hurt them. I think this is why people bury their head in the sands with many subjects. I think people can't always fully comprehend that. But like you said, you are responsible with how you use that very blunt weapon. Do you just bludgeon people in the face with it, or can you just lightly nudge them with it to start with? Use other versions. I'm starting to realize, I think, initially when we started this journey, because I think we were living so bluntly in truth with each other, it kind of worked. However, when I then tried to apply that concept to navigating with those in wider circles, I came into some instances where I think I caused offense or just came across as rude and blunt and offensive. And so it was learning how do you still speak truth with, as you say, without bludgeoning someone to death with that quite powerful weapon. Yes.
It takes practice, doesn't it? And it takes practice to articulate your truth. And I think even speaking your truth, even to each other, sometimes there is a need to really tune into what your truth is rather than have a reactive truth. So you can say something that triggers me. I can say something back that might be my truth, but it might not be delivered in a way that actually is my truth.
Yes. I suppose this is what we talked about at the end of the last podcast, where we talked about listening to those inner voices that may come up in those immediate reactions. But yes, speaking truth doesn't mean, speaking that very, obvious, emotional reaction. It might mean yes. Now, this is, I must admit, I have struggled because is this filtering? Is this lying? I don't think so. Because you're right, as you say, it's just how you use the tool. Like, you don't have to use the exact words that come as your immediate reaction, but you can learn to use better words that don't attack the other person, because it can also be the phrasing, I feel, in often how you deliver this. Like I have, this happened the other day. I think we had actually had a little bit of a disagreement, or falling out or whatever, just didn't feel synchronized and aligned in our intentions with each other. And I realized I wanted to communicate with you, but was just kept staring at the blank message, not knowing what to write, because I was trying to figure out what's the, like, it was almost like I was running the sentences through, like, oh, if I say that, no, she'll say that in response. And then it was like, oh, if I say that, I say it that way. No, she'll say that in response. So I was doing this quite automatically. Now, this may be from experience, I know what things will get certain reactions from you. And also it was in my own mind, or I don't know whether you do this, but for me, it was playing it out that way allowed me to hear it out loud, even to myself, before you click send, just saying it out loud in your head, or typing it out and deleting it, or whatever it was. There's just no, like, is that truly what I'm trying to say? And I think you said this before about really getting down to what is it you're actually feeling? What is the true truth of your feeling? You're right. Is it that you actually, right, like you might have been triggered by a behavior, but it's actually you don't feel safe is the truth. And that can be different. So, oh, that your behavior at that moment caused a particular trigger, but actually it made me feel unsafe. But that might, as you say, take a few moments to get to that realization yourself before you've had this emotional reaction to whatever's happened. So yes, that's where you just need to be careful with it. As I say, it's a powerful tool, but one that can cause great harm if used unwieldily.
And it comes back to does come back to tuning in, because how you deliver that, you mentioned the connection back to listening, and it's listening to the cues in the other person as to how much of your truth they are ready to receive. And that takes practice.
Yeah, it takes
it's emotional intelligence,
yeah.
but it's also not dulling your truth. So I talk about lenses a lot, and the concept of like a mirror ball. And there's a really old guy called, I think his name's Jonathan Brookfield, and he talks about these lenses that we portray to the world. As long as none of them are lies or mistruths, then there are multiple truths. What were we reading recently? It talks about multiple truths. And this idea that as long as your core truth is in alignment, actually how much of your truth people see is really up to them. Apart from the words that you say, people will see your truth by your actions.
Yes, I think that's there's many phrases I've heard, or many different metaphors I've seen. The one where there's a picture of a cube and it's got two light sources on it, and they cast different shaped shadows from different directions. Or it's not a cube, sorry, it's a cylinder, isn't it? And from one direction it's casting a circle as a shadow, and the other it's casting a rectangle. And you think, well, they're both, we know it's a cylinder that we're looking at as the truth, but there's two other facts. Sorry, there's truth or facts. I can't remember which way it was around. But yes, the point being, we can observe things
That's
differently.
A different debate.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, we can observe things differently and still have truths in them. Yes, is what you were trying to say. Is there can be multiple versions that, or the other one, I suppose, is the elephant. You blindfold several people and tell them to feel a different part of the elephant, and they'll tell you a different thing. Like, oh, I've got a really wide, thick part. Oh, I've got a really long part. I've got a big flappy. And it's all an elephant.
Experience,
but our experience of it is
truth,
different. Yeah. Yes, and I see why with truth, yes, you need to learn to.
I think as long as what you're putting out is in alignment to your truth, whatever that may be, which bit of your truth people see and understand, because everything we see in other people is a reflection of self. So whether people take offense to it is purely a reflection of themselves and where they're at, or if they agree with it, that's again a reflection, isn't it?
It would be interesting as well. Now, where does living in truth just, as you say, where would that slip into the line of maybe just being obnoxious and like just trying to get your own way and saying, oh, this is who I am though, and like, you're just trying to get your way and manipulate, I suppose. That's not something we've experienced ourselves, but I realize it could be. I mean, how psychopathic would you have to be? I don't know, to want to pursue, like, essentially you're still manipulating truth there, but you're saying you're speaking your truth. Because this could be gaslighters.
That's not then in alignment with your truth, is it?
It's hard to say, isn't it? Like I agree, because we might have our own internal ones, but how do you know somebody else is when speaking the truth? Like, so if you were the receiver of someone speaking truth, how would you know they're not using that as a manipulation tactic, maybe?
You don't, but along with truth is trust, isn't it? And if someone is genuinely living in truth with you, I think you can tell. I mean, I know I pick up on energies of people very well, but I can usually tell when someone is BSing me, and I can usually tell, even if it's not the actual lie. I mean, we can relate to this being parents, can't we? We know when we are told a lie. It doesn't necessarily matter what the lie is, it's the energy that's felt behind it.
Maybe, yeah. And even in our own experience as a couple, yes, we've had moments where you're right, I've admitted things to you or vice versa, but we both know there's something amiss energetically. We just can't, because we then haven't had the explicit version of what that is, or we've been told, as you say, a lie to cover that. Yes, I've heard other people talk about the distortions of reality almost, aren't they? That happen when a lie occurs, or when you're right, something is genuinely out of a lie. Because it could be, you're right, somebody is just not telling you something for privacy. Privacy is a genuine reason not to tell somebody, and even between couples. However, there is a difference between privacy and secrecy. Because I mean, we actually, I think, early on when we were trying to work out the navigation of what does living in truth mean, I think I actually just outright asked you, well, what about what people would call a white lie?
I was going to say, what's
keeping a surprise for a birthday, that's a genuine reason to not maybe tell somebody or mislead somebody. But I think what you answered at that time from memory, and correct me, if I'm wrong here, was it was intention, and it's the word you've often said to me. I think it was behind the feeling, but because intention is the energetic feeling behind it. Is this malicious? Is this benign? Is it beneficial? What's the intention behind it is felt before the actions, as you say, then come into play. Would you still agree with that, in a sense?
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking, so what if someone says, is there such a thing as a lie if you live in truth? Because I think living in truth isn't just about omission of a lie. I think it's an energy, it's an intention, it's everything that comes with that as a person. And I think you asked me about privacy and secrecy. Privacy is a difficult one, I think, because everybody's experience, and if your privacy has been abused, a lot of people have big walls up around. And I'm not talking physical privacy of shutting the door when you go for a wee. I'm talking kind of the emotional privacy of messages of thoughts even. And again, one of the things that we came across was that we realized we weren't in alignment with was how much you share with people, when I am very intentional about what I share with whom, not to withhold truth, but often going back to that conversation as to who's ready for what truth. You're, in my view, an oversharer. Not so much now, but you used to be.
I think it was something I had to learn. That was when we've talked about this previously, about knowing self. Yeah.
Your oversharing triggered my lack of privacy, because my privacy with you was my guard was a lot lower, and I trusted you with my privacy. So then when you overshared with other people that I hadn't trusted the same level of privacy with, that challenged me.
Yeah.
So yes, there's such a thing as privacy, but actually it's about understanding the other person's emotional privacy. I think is really important when we're dealing with truth, and who's ready to how much truth should be exposed at any one time about yourself and another person, I suppose.
No, I definitely evolved in this line of thought since we first started living this way. But like I said, I think that was when I started navigating with people who didn't understand our language like we do. Like, again, you also take into consideration, me as a person, when I speak, like, you write my immediate reactions, and you even know how to brace yourself against, like, oh, that was just his immediate reaction, and like, so having some knowledge of the person you're conversing with helps. But as I say, that was the reason why I discovered speaking in this way and in wider circles caused problems, was because, yeah, you realize some people aren't ready for the entire truth.
But yeah, going back, you asked me a question about intent, and I'd still stand by that, because again, the oversharing was never an intent to harm, but it broke my level of privacy. But the intent wasn't there to harm me. Whereas
benign,
I have had a relationship in the past where the intent was to embarrass me. So that is a very different breach of truth. And it's using truth as a weapon. And as we've highlighted, it's a very blunt tool. And if it's not used in the right way, can actually cause more harm than good, I think.
Oh, yes, because it does, by its nature, make you very vulnerable. There's nothing to, like, because why do we lie? Why do we omit stuff? Why do we not tell people the full picture? And this can be from personal to professional reasons. There can be many reasons why somebody might decide to have privacy around a certain subject. But that doesn't mean you can't live in truth. It just, I think I can't remember. There's something I heard about this recently that was saying exactly that, you know, it's not living in truth to not say things to people. It's actually conserving your energy. You know, you're keeping, you're not act, as long as you're not acting in a way, when you act in a certain way that goes against your values as a very core thing, I think then yes, you're still living within your truth. You're just not delivering it to those around you who, you're right, might not be ready to receive that. They might energetically be
showing, not speaking, aren't you?
Yes. And yes, I think this is where you're right. You know, most people show through their actions, and their lies will appear through what they do and what they don't do. Yeah.
And you know, that kind of, we've talked a lot about speaking clearly with intent and knowing, although we both are bumblers and we both and ah a lot, but actually what we say and the message we want to get across is most of the time quite planned and quite articulated through truth rather than...
I think we've also thought about this stuff often, because oftentimes I've had conversations with people outside of us, and they've said things like, "Oh, you seem very switched on to this," and or said something like they've described it as a characteristic of me, not as if like this is knowledge. And it's made me think, oh, maybe I sit down and think about this stuff more often than other people do.
Well, we embody it, we live it.
Yeah, maybe that's it. You know, even I think one time, this was many years ago now, someone even said to me that they just called me self-reflective. Said, "Oh, you're very self-reflective." And it was just this realization, oh, isn't this what, like, maybe the negative of that is I over hypercriticalize, you know, everything I do and analyze everything I do. But at the same time, maybe realize, yeah, maybe there is an element of just knowing yourself again, like we've said.
That's the healing process, though. And I agree, you can over-analyze and you can be overly critical about things. And I think I've been there. I think I go there in places. But as long as you're aware, I suppose, of the why behind that. But that speaking clearly, I guess, comes from something else we've had to explore in both of our conditioning, and that is the use of guess culture rather than being explicit. What's your take on that?
Yeah, this is something I recently heard about as it was probably from some random Reddit post or something on social media I saw, where somebody described their family growing up, and they use these words, ask culture, and guess culture. Now, I'd never heard of these at all, and this person was describing their family unit who always operated in guest culture, and I chuckled because I went, "What? That's my family. Like, that's how I would talk with my parents, and how, like, nobody would ever." And then it made me realize there was even I didn't even realize it was a thing that, you know, that people would ask questions in a different way. So rather than saying, you know, say you wanted a lift somewhere, it would be, "Oh, I'll be going such and such at this time." You'd never ask for the actual lift. You'd imply there's other things going on.
You manipulate.
Yes, you are. But if the other person operates in that guess way, they know you're trying to infer about hinting at something. Yeah. And they'd go, "Oh yeah, I'll be going by such and such thing. Oh, would you like a lift?" Or they'd do it the other way around. Or even sometimes the question wouldn't even get asked. It would just go, "Oh yeah, do you mind if you jump," or whatever, you know, there'd be some way it would get, you're right, but if everyone operates on guest culture, it all works because you all have your own sort of internal system with how you navigate, probably not very efficiently, but people work that way.
You can get through that way.
Like what I realized, like you said, so this post or whoever was sharing the story made me realize this, and then it's made me realize it more and more in our dynamic that, oh yeah, there's like ask culture is just asking questions, like direct us over, go, "Oh, can I have a lift?" And you go, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll take a lift." Or, "No, I can't." Like you should get there quicker is what I realize, and there's no ambiguity in the
and
question.
it comes usually from a space of truth rather than a manipulation to get somebody else to say
right.
something.
Guest culture starts with the manipulation straight away because you're trying to gauge whether somebody's like, "Oh, are you going to bed soon?" I mean, so, and to be fair, we do this within ourselves as well. We used to we realized there were certain, like, you're right, like you were wanting attention and you were wanting me to come to bed with you, you know, something like that. And you would ask like, "Oh, are you coming to bed soon?" Which now, you know, and what's even weird now is when I hear you say things like to me, it's a flag to me to make me go, "You're not speaking your truth, nor am I giving you clear enough expectations of what I'm doing at the moment." Like, I'm obviously, you know, in this state of not being truthful with you either. And we usually put some sort of step in to kind of talk, you know, truthfully there. So it's, yeah, I think there's those sorts of aspects to it of, you know, ask and guess culture. And living in truth, yes, is kind of just applying this ask culture, because I think even when you're in an argument, sometimes literally just asking the most maybe painful but obvious question and just getting straight to it and go like, what is this thing? And the other person might even be irritated the fact that you asked because
Or not know.
because they have to do the internal digging to go, I don't bloody know why I feel like this. And it's kind of like a weird thing bugging, but it's obviously coming from like some dynamic or some sort of reaction. Yeah, no, I agree. And it's working that out, isn't it?
I think there's asking the right question is important, but sometimes asking blunt questions can be a trigger for people because it's about being wrong. And we know from the education system, and we've removed 2 of our children from the education system at the moment, but children are taught not to be wrong. And I think
we carry that with us from schooling.
Absolutely. I still now have a fear when I'm in my own studies of getting things wrong, and just in general life
judges you that as a business owner. You're right. Yeah, if you fail, even though that is actually how you learn, and every successful business owner will say they have failed many times, being a failure is still deemed a negative thing, regardless of whether that's actually what lessons did I learn, like, oh, I failed a business, oh, you get the sad, like, oh, it didn't work out.
But I think in terms of asking direct questions, many people are triggered by that, because if you're asking me a direct question, it's usually quite a closed question, even if it's an open question.
Yes, you're trying to get A or B out of them.
Yeah,
really.
And if you don't know, then the implication is that you're wrong, or that you have a specific answer you want from me. Not that that's always true.
No.
So I think it's about asking blunt questions, again, coming back to this ripple effect, knowing the person, intuiting where they're at, what they need, and maybe asking the question as to connecting to their feelings rather than connecting to an answer, because feelings can't be wrong.
No, but this is where, I mean, to put other language around this as well, like feelings can be masculine or feminine, dominant or passive. And I think that's where, finding that balance of, you're right, a very dominant, forthright, masculine way of getting to the truth, or a more feminine, softer way of getting to the truth. Maybe that's a good way to put it, because sometimes I like, when I was saying about, we call it blunt truths, and you think actually a soft truth sounds like a mission, right? But actually, if you say a feminine truth, you're just delivering it in this more motherly or nurturing way that isn't like, oh, I'm attacking you. Because again, a masculine might be a very attacking way about, you're right, blunt, very straightforward. And attack could be another word for attack, could be direct. You're going direct to the point.
Attack is intent, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You're very precise. Maybe it's a very masculine way of asking in the truth, and you go outright, is it A or B? I want to know the answer. Or the more feminine way to be like, I see why you might be feeling that. I understand that you have it, because again, even empathizing with the other side. And going, I can see you might have feelings, or you don't know, but like this is causing a problem. And then you have this back and forth dialogue. And I think that's where
I think it softens, doesn't it?
But that's what I mean by so rather than the word soften, people thinking negative, like no, masculine and feminine. You've got these harder, harsher way, the masculine ways, and you've got the more feminine, softer ways of delivering these truths. Still truths, but using this energy of masculine and feminine, which we realise pervades everything. We're not talking about, penises and fannies there. We're talking about
I love the way you went penis as a correct term.
I know, yeah, okay, sorry, penis. I know, penis and
as
vaginas.
the colloquial. But yeah, it's nothing to do with
nothing to do with genitals and biological. No,
sex. It's energetics, isn't it? And it's the yin yang, the alpha omega. It's the
duality of
dualities of everything. Yeah. And living in truth has to have those dualities, because everything has to have those dualities. And if you ignore one part of them, you are not living in truth. And something we've worked hard at is that balancing of energy.
Yes, and actually, this is just coming to me as we've been talking about this, but you're right. Truth, when it lives in one or the other, becomes distorted. So if you, and I don't know whether I entirely agree with this language as I'm making this up as I'm going now, but it feels that like what would be a super hyper masculine truth would be like authoritarianism. This is my truth. You can't be anything else. And this is the truth. Whereas what's the feminine equivalent? Would that be there are many truths and nothing is truthful? Like, I don't know. Is that the exact where it's so fluid, it's so floopy that there's nothing solid, but it's all true because you agree. I mean, like, there's states where you feel very feminine and you feel everything, and that's not untrue, but it doesn't help you pinpoint maybe where it is. I don't know. That to say this language doesn't.
We could go down an ontological discussion there because.
Oh, could we now?
Because if you say there is only one truth, I mean, if you kind of look down a religious view, there is this idea of one God, one truth,
Well, it
one
depends on
reality.
which religion you look at. Yes.
Yes.
Monotheism versus the multi one, polytheism. Yeah.
But this idea that there is a greater truth then than one's perception of it would, if we're going to map this to masculine and feminine, be the very masculine, direct, it is or it isn't, you don't believe it or you do believe it view.
Yep.
The opposite end of that spectrum, if you're looking at kind of interpretivism, looks at there are multiple truths depending on our one-way perspective of
the
it.
feminine way of
I
looking
don't
at truth.
necessarily think I sit in either, actually, but this is not a surprise to me now. We look at the balance of needing
This is
both.
about to say, I was trying to give examples of what might be one locked in one particular way, and what we're realizing is yes, that we could describe many ways where you see these things, these truths arising in the world as very masculine forms or very feminine forms. What we're realizing is there is definitely a need for balance. It's not about one or the other, nor is it about equality, as in like the sense of just leveling everything out and everything is the same. It's realizing there's differences in either side, and both energies bring something different, and finding that balance
And
within
even
ourselves.
between us, I mean, quite often, even now really, when we do have, I'm not going to say arguments, but more clashes in energies, is usually when I've come home from work, or I'm for whatever reason in study or work mode, which puts me in a masculine state, and I'm having to switch out of that into mum mode or house mode, and you're still in work boss mode, so you're still in your masculine, and we clash. Or we're both in a state of wanting to put our masculine down and be in the feminine, but then there's no leader in the house, and there's no. So it's that clash and the need for balance. That doesn't mean that we can't both be those things, but it's understanding and articulating, this is how I'm feeling. I need to be able to put this down.
It's something I've noticed much more lately since we've been addressing this masculine and feminine energy within our relationship and within ourselves, is that when I give you those masculine boundaries, the not orders, but the just the even if it's a framework of like, this is what I'm doing, just being clear with what I'm doing, even if I have no idea how it, I don't,
boundaries.
Even if that doesn't require me to plan for anything for anyone else, it's just for my own things. As soon as I do that, you immediately it dissipates all the unease and it allows you to have some form of structure that exists.
Order, isn't it?
You're right, and it's not so much order that you feel controlled, but it's enough order that you don't feel that I'm just a chaotic mess of a man who's just like, might as well be a child, the man-child type experience, that I'm sure many women can relate to in their partners. But you're right, what is the man-child? It's just the man in his feminine childlike form, who wants to be cared. And you know what? I love it when it's really funny. There have been times I've noticed when, not in an unhealthy way, I've obviously been in that more feminine, playful like state where I've not wanted to lead. I've just wanted to do my own thing. And you've even been in a very mothering, giving state, just like, caring. And actually, you've not felt like that was like
it's a dominant feminine.
Yeah, well, it could be a little bit, but it was the energy I felt. It was done in such a way that it felt like you were genuinely caring for me, and I felt very loved and seen by you. It's just like bringing me a drink while I'm doing my own thing, or silly, like it's silly. It's not silly. It's small. I said that before, didn't I? These small acts, you realize, if done with the correct energy, can have massive impact on people. And that works for you as well. Like, I feel like there's moments where I've just given, like you said, you might not feel that in the immediate moment. I'm feeling like feminine and I just want to doss around and do nothing. Whereas I realize that if I just give that little bit of energy to the masculine, enough to form something, I can get exactly what I want, and it gives you that form and structure. Or even just giving you something that, like we said before, there's those acts that be energetically depleting to someone, but if I give that without expectation, without what's the word, like guilting, or like without any of that, and I just give and just accept my time there for what it is, and just appreciate that, usually what will happen, you're right, is I will get exactly what I desire afterwards, which I find fascinating.
And it fulfills, it's that fulfilling energy cycle between us. And I mean, our logo for Journey into Union is the tattoo on our wrist, isn't it? And it's that balance between,
I can't even remember where that
self.
imagery came from. This was all drawn up around the time of our union.
Yeah, we had it as.
And for some reason, you had said about this imagery of yin yang, and I think we've been reading the Tao Te Ching at the time, the Buddhist. Is it Buddhist? Buddhist philosophical works, and So that imagery was sort of there anyway, and we'd been talking about this masculine, feminine, but it had just been arising a lot for us lately. And then the symbols were to do with, again, masculine, feminine. Looking at it now on my wrist, like symbols, masculine, feminine, and then the higher self was God, or whatever you want to call it, the universe at the time. We called
the
it
true balance.
even though that the spirituality element of unity, essentially, I suppose, oneness being separated into two was actually, I think, the symbolism.
Oneness is into two dualities.
Yeah, and how they all feed into each other, and the unity then becomes the two again, and the feminine draws and the masculine creates, and it's that there was all that imagery, I suppose, going on.
The masculine, feminine is in everything, isn't it? And
the polarity of everything, duality.
Yeah, and I think we have found a way to explore that through archetypes, and we found a way to explore the masculine, feminine in its healthy state, in its shadow state. And there are multiple different archetypes that different people draw upon. What's been the most aligning archetypes that we've explored, do you think?
We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier when we talked about personifying certain parts of ourselves. I think, you can actually get creative. If you read certain books and texts, they talk about archetypes often, and they have some very, cleared outline ones. I'm sure if anyone, follows any sort of esoteric work, you'll know about tarot and the sort of the imagery they use in tarot cards. Is based upon these archetypes. So humans have known about archetypes. I don't think this is something new we've stumbled upon. I think it's just putting it into this concept of, it permeates everything.
It's allowed us to understand each other and selves of each other when living in truth, though, hasn't it?
Because I think you can communicate these, imagery and stories allow us to very quickly communicate an idea. We all understand stories. I mean, if you look at every modern Hollywood film, there's the same story essentially underpinning, whichever actor and face it is on the front, on the foreground. But we understand these humans from these stories from ancient times. So I think it's archetypes are literally just ways for us to encompass these things quicker, and it's why people can do things that seem superhuman to us. Is they just embody these archetypes on a regular basis. I think some of this gets a little distorted with social media. We see very small snippets of people, and we see people maybe in these very archetypical states, and we think that's how they always are, which isn't the case. We understand that, we drift in and out of archetypes. Some are with us at certain times in our lives, and some, come and go with every day.
I think you can use them as well to your benefit in terms of sometimes when there's a specific state that I know I need to be in, or I need to put myself in, being able to really tune in and embody a certain archetype helps to
I agree.
sort of align with the energy of that archetype. So, I mean, there's obviously the king, queen, but there's also the seductress energy and an archetype. There's the, the lover, even the magician to an extent, and looking at which one of those you choose to be in any moment of time, as well as using them as a reflective tool, I think is important.
And I think, not like you say, using them consciously, but I think they subconsciously exist anyway. These are the shadow aspects, that can take control of us, and we can, they exist whether we want them to or not. And I think it's just whether you bring consciousness to them. Because I think people wonder why they go through their lives and like, oh, I've always been that way. Like, no, you've just always allowed your archetypes to control you as opposed to the other way around.
Or you've had one that's led the dominant.
Yeah, totally.
And I mean, the lover is one that we can both relate to as an archetype for different reasons, but has had prominent positive and shadow aspects in both of our lives.
Yeah.
But understanding that and going, okay, so I take some of the power back from that archetype and give it to.
Yep.
It's almost like playing a game of chess or something in your mind, isn't it? Like I
agree,
actually tuning my power and energy into this archetype right now.
I believe this is where the manifestation stuff comes from. It's this ability that we seem to have. You write the archetypes and the stories. Why do you get goosebumps on the back of your neck when you hear like the hero story, or like because it's actually doing something physiological to us. why are we drawn to tears at certain storylines? Why are we invoked to like joy or whatever, or even rage? Like you can induce anger through the right sort of music very easily. Put some heavy metal on and you'll quickly get angry and aggressive. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you've got to get those extra few push-ups in. Yeah, totally. But yeah, so we have known this, and I suppose coming back to living in truth and what that means is archetypes are part of this truth. Like we talked about these before, choosing these ones. And there are certain ones where you go, okay, I see you. That may be very self-destructive, loathing part of myself. And you go, okay, and rather than deny that, and rather than say, no, that's not something, I'm all love and sunshine, I'm all positive vibes. Go, no, I'm not all positive vibes. Sometimes I can be a right, irritating motherfucker. And I've just got to, get on with it, but actually having control of that. And as you say, there's sometimes I know full well I can be very capable of very dark things or thoughts,
as are we all.
This is what I mean. And it's actually made me realize when I came to that understanding of realizing it's not that there's anything wrong with you. It's just humans can think very dark things. It makes you realize why we can get to the atrocities of world wars. It's why we can get to the atrocities of inquisitions, over faith and religion, and the abhorrent things humans can do to each other. It's quite simply it's because we have these shadow aspects of ourselves, and if we allow ourselves to be led without control or without awareness, these things can be manipulated by others for whatever end.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the shadow isn't always bad. The shadow side of self is purely the opposite to the yang, isn't it?
Yes,
so it's not that the shadow side is bad, it's that the shadow can invoke feelings that then you lead with behaviours. The shadow itself isn't bad. Neither is the light good.
No, this is it. I mean, there's two polarities really, and then there's shades in between, isn't there? Of all these things. There are two very poles of these archetypes. Of what you can think, what's the most evil one of this, and what's the most positive, altruistic version of it. And then you're right. There's shades in between, and they can all manifest and appear in different forms to people. And they become, you're right, the ways you behave, like groups of behaviours, if you want to call them that, habits. They can become all of that.
And you might find that certain archetypes that you embody are attractive to other people. Certain archetypes are quite repulsive to other people.
Yeah, they will generate the opposite response usually, won't they? If you're putting one out there, usually it will attract its polar counterpart. But yes, there's many archetypes that I think form these sort of truths that come through us. They're the things that want to manifest through us. And you're right, and they do seem to come through us. They're not always of us. If we can observe the mind and we realize we are not necessarily the truth, it's coming through us. I think this is where you can align back to living in truth in that sense comes through us, as opposed to we can manipulate it as humans. We have free will, but truth is going to come through us regardless.
And truth is, just jumping back to the tattoo comment of relating it to the archetypes, is whichever one you are living in, the alignment comes back to your higher self, your truth, whatever kind of word you wanted to use, but unless it's in alignment, it's not your truth. And it's as simple and as throat cutting as that, but that's not easy to do, because sometimes we get led by others, don't we, and influenced by those around us.
But that comes to awareness, because as you say, unless you're aware, and there is this unfortunate thing that, as we are younger in the world, we are more vulnerable, because you're right, we can be manipulated. We still don't know ourselves well enough until, you've maybe learnt a few lessons the hard way, and you've got into your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, whenever it is you learn these lessons in life, I think that's the process of getting older, isn't it, supposedly?
Supposedly. Not about maturity.
No.
What did I say the other day? It's not about not doing things. It's about growing with experience. So you don't stop doing things. You just choose which things are stupid to do.
Well, yeah, I suppose. Choose different things. Yeah.
But I think the archetypes and knowing self, that tuning into self, is also very present in knowing how you need your needs met by other people. And that kind of takes us to this idea of a love language, doesn't it? And we all have very different love languages. And if you haven't learned what yours are, I think...
Yeah, it comes back to the awareness, doesn't it? Yeah. you're right. I don't think we would be able to articulate even a year or two ago what all of ours were. I don't even know. I'd say I'll be able to articulate them all now necessarily. I'm still
It might
learning.
change as well.
And I was about to say that, yeah, there is maybe this chance of, as long as it's not like flippant behavior that's changing every day of the week or whatever, you know, like you're allowed to change and evolve as a person. But yes, knowing what satisfies you, what fulfills you, as you say, and then learning, is there a threshold? You know, can you receive too much of that thing? Can you receive too little? Is there, you know, what's the actual thing you need?
Again, it's balance, isn't it? But I think you can have, I think living with somebody else in truth, you have to. So an example, it used to be that you would say things and think that you were saying or doing all the right things for what I needed. And actually it was all not falling on deaf ears, but it wasn't hitting, it wasn't resonating with my energies or my nervous system, because I am a tactile touch person. That's how I need to receive, not through words. Whereas you're a very acts of service and hearing things, and that's how it resonates with you. And that just made us clash, essentially. So none of us were getting what we needed.
Also, I think with that, what you were just saying was a little bit, I realized like I have to also genuinely mean those things. So like you can say things and not genuinely mean them, because not so much now living in truth to say, but this was in the past, it'd be like I was saying things thinking you wanted to hear them, and it was that like, oh, if you want to hear that, I'm doing the right thing. But if that was like crushing some part of me internally because I knew I wasn't going to do that, or I didn't really want to do that thing, I was just saying because I thought that's what you needed to hear, you, like I said, it was a losing game for both of us, because I was losing because I wasn't really doing something I wanted to do, or it just wasn't aligning. And for you weren't getting what you wanted because energetically, it might have even been the exact act you wanted, but because the intention behind it was different. It wasn't coming through in that sense.
I definitely think checking out kind of love languages is important to know how to communicate, because I think there's so often so many couples, and we fall into this as well, think you're doing what the other person wants or needs,
that's what I was gonna say,
and therefore get quite disgruntled when it's not received, which can in itself cause,
well, because it feels like you're putting the effort in, but even
effort's just
if
falling.
this is what I mean, even if you feel like, okay, I learned from my past mistake and I'm really, really, like I did everything I thought and it still didn't work, and like you're right, that can be that sort of frustration that can appear. You're totally right. Yes,
which is where it's powerful to regroup and go, what do you need from me right now?
Ask, yeah, exactly, yeah.
I think whatever it boils down to, it's about being seen.
Yes.
And it's just your love language is, how do you feel? How does being seen physically resonate with you and emotionally resonate with you?
Yeah.
So sometimes you seeing me when I'm on my knees after work and I'm shattered, just seeing me and having a cuddle and just holding me in that space is what I need to feel seen. Sometimes it's bigger gestures. Sometimes, it's just about feeling seen, isn't it? But when we don't feel seen, I think that can lead to something else that we've termed fireballs in the past. And it's kind of us language that I suppose maybe we need to explain.
So, I think this is what we talked about in truth, of like how you deliver it. So obviously you can truthfully say some very truthful things, but they could be fiery. They can be loaded with connotations, or just, the intention is painful behind them. And actually sometimes this can crop up. One time I remember us having we were really, really trying to have quite what you call a heated conversation, where we were obviously both emotionally triggered and charged by whatever it was we were trying to communicate through. And every time one would say something, the other would feel hurt. We weren't immediately reacting, but it was really hard for either of us to say something back that wasn't just a little bit emotionally loaded with something. And we both kept apologizing to each other, because we both would say it, go, no, sorry, that was, we would acknowledge we'd just given a fireball, so sorry, no, that was a fireball. And we would then go, no, the only reason it's a fireball back is because you're right. It was like you would say
emotional response,
you would say something that would hurt, and I just wanted to make you feel how I was feeling by saying something back. And it makes you realize how you could get into blazing rows over stuff like this,
or bickering. I mean, so many couples, don't it? And I think we've been there too. Is like sometimes it's not even about something big. It can just be about like, who's had the shittest day? Like, I'm tired.
Well, you just don't
I'm
control
tired
your
because I've
fire.
done this.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes
And
a tit for tat. That's
it's
it.
that like fireball of energy is like, well, you're not seeing me.
Yes.
And
because what does the
that's
person
why-
want? You're right. You've both had shitty days. Maybe and you're right. What you want is just the other person to acknowledge and go, "No, we're okay." And you're right. And half the time, we hug each other, go, "No, we're okay." We both maybe cry, get and go, "Okay," and we carry on. You know, that's that sort of.
So it's for me, the fireballs crop up when our love languages aren't active. So when we are not feeling seen and we're not being acknowledged for what we're feeling at the time, it's like, oh, I'm going to throw an emotional attack at you.
Well, because that's the pain you're feeling from not getting what you need. And I suppose this is where you have to like, where do we have to self-regulate our own emotions, and where do we have to get that from someone else? Because I think this is something else that has cropped up for us. You know, it's understanding. You're right. Where was that genuinely something that either breached a boundary, or you're right, you're not doing something to make you feel seen? That you're right, you're like, you know, you can't get from yourself. You know, if it is attention from somebody else, well, then you can't get that from yourself. You know, if that is the thing you need external attention. But it's also checking yourself. Am I being like you? And I think this is where you've had difficulty differentiating between like needy and needs, because I agree, there is a place where you could slip into, you're just demanding things. You're just demanding things. You're just demanding. You're like, it's not a need. You're just being demanding. And maybe, and I agree, but that's tinged with all sorts of shame, guilting, like, and where's the line on that? That's very hard to say. You know, where's the hard, explicit line without communication? And it could be that on a particular day, I've got no problem you bossing me around and asking for this, and I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. You know, it's like, it's not taking from me, but then on other days, it could be really taking from me. So,
and that's about tuning into the other person, isn't it? Yes. But I think when fireballs come up, there's two things. Firstly is owning them. And, you know, we all do it. Yeah. But living in truth is about going, actually, I shouldn't have said that, or not I shouldn't have said it, but it came out that way because I am feeling. Because fireballs only appear where I think they bring up, bit like Dave's, they bring up past trauma and they go, yeah, but do you remember when he did this? Or do you remember when? And I know full well the power with that is that we could shred each other in just words.
We've said this a few times, haven't we? When like, thought, yeah, man, if I really wanted to like, oh yeah, because we know each other quite intimately, like, yeah, we could really get down to
I think a lot of couples do, like they know the pain points.
Yeah, you know the pain points, so you know where to push. You're right. Well, we used to do this, not even with just like attacking each other, but using the emotional manipulating pain points to get what we want. You know, we'd enable the other person, like, behaviors. You know, if you do this, I'll get this out of you. Oh, okay, yeah, you just squeeze, just apply a little bit of pressure. You know where the other person hurts, and you're right. It's terrifying at the same time, realizing, yeah, you have to put trust and honor and hope this person won't screw you over. And I get that's what a lot of people struggle with.
It's vulnerability.
Yeah, but that is
if
truth.
you have a grounded masculine energy, then vulnerability is not as difficult as it seems. The problem is people don't have that grounding between them, I think. Or don't know how to access it. Everyone has it, I think.
Yes, no, and I'd say this is because you could even look a little wider and go, why can't people debate anymore? But you're right, is it the same thing? People can't, and I'm saying people very generally here, but I know I'm fully aware of this as well. You know, it's that inability to, as you say, ground, that ability to, even if you feel a very strong emotion, to not express it in its rawest state, to process that within yourself and go, why am I feeling like that? You know, it's that self-reflection first because you're right. If you self-reflect and go, no, there's a very genuine reason I feel like that genuinely goes against one of my core values, something I believe in, blah, 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 whatever. As long as it's genuine and it's not some sort of...
It's an alignment of truth.
Yeah, again, that's sort of, as long as it's not a manipulation of other, then it stands. But... So
yeah, fireballs is about owning when you do them or throw them, but also owning in truth why they're coming up for you.
Yes. Is
there a pain point that you haven't dealt with, or is there trauma, or is there an experience that you haven't worked through with that person?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a responsibility of everyone living in truth, isn't it? And that process gets repeated. I mean, this is our third podcast in talking about this trio of
concepts and ideas,
really, but they came very naturally to us in this process, and they have now formed a cycle, if you will, of things that we not so consciously, we don't sit in ceremony every time, although we do review it every year. We don't sit in ceremony every time we have to deal with something, but we still go through this 3-step process.
We do sometimes, you say we don't sit, we do sometimes, I suppose you could call it a meditative practice, have a similar sort of ritualized reverence for ceremony, where sometimes where we feel there's something deeper that needs to be collectively worked through.
It's holding space for that,
As I
isn't it?
say, and oftentimes in those situations, we'll just talk about something afterwards or before, or just at some point in that time, that about ourselves or about each other, that will usually move something forward. But yeah, as I say, beyond that, it's generally just the self work. It's the shadow work, you might be called in other circles, or just developing that and learning.
And these things that can come up living in truth, there's always going to be things, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because we're human, and no matter how long you've been together, we live separate lives, and so there are going to be things that come up that challenge or trigger or process. And I think someone said that I heard the other day, we're always going to live trying to undo what we've lived, because that's the nature of being a human.
Yeah.
So there's going to be things that come up, but living in this process of kintsugi, opening it up, ripping the band-aid off, the phoenix of deciding how you want to move forward, then the truth in actually living that out, that application of process, we do probably subconsciously to smaller things now between us, but then there's also times where we go, actually, this is something that's causing, we've just been through one recently, and it's causing proper issues. Or
I think, like you say, subconscious. The ones that happen subconsciously are because we've already done some of the work. We've removed some of those pains or triggers or just situations, and just chosen different paths. And it's naturally started to happen, like you say. It just happens because it's the way we think now. And we've said this before.
We can speak our truth in that situation a lot more comfortably than we used to be able to. So it gets resolved quicker.
No, and I think then with the new ones coming along, that you're right, those are just where we get to the edge of something new, or there's something underneath the past thing. Like that's happened many times. It's like we've dealt with the most immediate, obvious thing that was causing us to argue or whatever all the time. And I think, oh, great, we seem to have moved through that one. And then we'll get back to and something like, well, it's not quite the same because we know we've moved through that trigger, but there's something still here, and you realize, oh no, there's and that's where sometimes you'll get to. I think this is how we realize some of the more child woundings, in our child psyche. We're like, oh no, there's something really under there, like a father wound or a mother wound. It's like, oh yeah, there's something deep under there, and your entire life you realize you've lived with this. And you constantly masked it so that you thought it was your partner, you thought it was your kids,
and
you thought it was your
nothing to do with the other person. But that's how it shows itself up, isn't it?
And I think that's where we're getting to now. You're starting to get to some of the deeper wounds of life, and you think, oh gosh, I've carried that my entire life, and you've never realised.
And now it's showing.
And now it's showing it because there's nothing else for it to, you can't blame it on all these other things because we've lived in truth with all those other things. So it starts to eliminate that process quicker. Yeah. So I
there
suppose
will be a point where, not where there's not triggers or not where there's not things that come up, but point where actually, and I think to an extent we're there already in a lot of things that we've healed through, there just isn't the drama. Like there just isn't. And by drama, I don't mean that as a negative aspect, as in chaos and attraction, but I mean there just aren't the things that come up that cause those niggles.
Because
I'm not constantly doubting myself or doubting your behavior from past triggers. Because if I am, firstly, you feel it, that I'm feeling that. Secondly, I'm feeling triggered by this right now, and I speak that truth, and it dissipates instantly because you're able to shine the light on it.
Yes, I find that fascinating how quickly the feeling, as soon as given voice and brought into articulation, just disappears. You're right, like that, and you think, gosh, that was absolutely crippling me like a moment ago, and like you can feel mentally stuck, and even physically. Like often I feel like you can feel stuck in these things, and yeah, getting there quicker is definitely a benefit of living in truth, I must admit. And as you said, like I feel in one day having lots of difficult conversations, we've undone decades worth of trauma and wounding. It's
sort of twisting that reality of truth, isn't
and it makes you realize what's actually possible if you can truly get there. Because you're right, you would have thought if you looked at us on paper and where we got to, if you truly knew the nitty gritty, you'd be like, oh my gosh, how are you even still together? And you'd even think, maybe we're crazy to still be together. Yeah, exactly. Maybe we are. But at the same time, we wouldn't have got to this point where you're right. There's days I can't even comprehend not operating with, like, to the thought of being with someone else and having to like get to this point again. I think, gosh, how hard would that be? Or I don't know, you'd have to have somebody else who could see this way of living in truth. Like, I don't know, it's a strange thought concept, isn't it? To think, what would you have to do to start all over again? And
well, I think the same thing we did, you'd and for anyone who's kind of starting out on this journey, it's about, you have to start at the beginning of this process. And usually when this is the first time you do it, there's probably a lot that's going to come up,
Mm.
but then you keep doing it and less comes up because there's less things to come out the closet in that sense.
And you get a thicker skin to a sense. You learn how to, you're like, oh, I can hear really harsh things about myself, or even just things that hurt me.
And you
I can
learn how to
survive.
you learn how to deliver it respectfully without the fireballs. You learn how to avoid some of the triggers. All these things that we've talked about allow you to live in truth that way, but there has to be a starting point. But I do think anyone, it's a bit of a sweeping statement, anyone can heal through anything as long as both people want to do it through love and are committed to the process.
Yes, I agree, committing, because I think that was our turning point in that sense, was it had we not both decided to go through this healing journey of self and together, then it would have been very hard for one of us to do it ourselves, I feel. And that's not to say you can't, as you say, because I think there is that you have to work on the self just as much as you have to work on whoever it is, like the relationship you're trying to foster. But if you realize, trying to drag someone else along isn't what it should be about. There should be an effort of self-healing first, then combined healing. Yeah.
And often, all journeys start with self. Before we entered into this 3-step process, so to speak, we both had to do our own inner work very separately. Now, ours had the help of extra mentors and things out externally, but and in a way, I wish we'd have had mentors to take us through this process too. But I think it would have caused a lot of not less pain, but more ease and understanding of the journey. Someone who's walked it before you. But the inner work starts with you, and anyone who's going on this journey, even if I suppose your partner isn't at the same point as you, doesn't mean you can't do your inner work, because I think it will reveal to you what your boundaries are, what you want, what your needs are.
Your partner will very quickly see
Yes.
what the results, and they'll see you acting differently. And like you said, like that will matter more than what's said. Like say less, do more, and you'll probably notice a bit greater results. Yeah.
And that can be scary, because if you then have to come to face off with, well, what if the outcome isn't what I want it to be? I mean, we were there going into this process, we genuinely didn't know. I didn't know if I'm out.
I feel we've even come to that in sometimes speaking. I feel this happened even the other month. I said something and it was just like, because of how I positioned it, it made it, because I was speaking my truth, you said it makes it very hard for us to see if we can continue. And we had deeper conversations and we managed to come forward in a resolution. But it was that realization of like, oh my gosh, like it makes you realize, because it was more, I don't think either of us felt annoyed at what we'd said. We both respected what was being said, but it was like, oh man, if this is something we really can't navigate around, that might genuinely mean the end. And it seemed something so small and trivial, like the conversation we'd had about, but it just caused very much a realization of like,
it was a clash of very
just values. It was a clash of values,
wasn't
yes.
it?
So it was something very core to both of us, and it was just this realization: if we can't articulate in the way that this works together, this becomes a genuine problem.
But that doesn't mean you still have to agree with each other, because living in truth is about navigating and choosing. That's that Phoenix aspect, isn't it? How do we move forward? We can negotiate a middle ground where we both get what we want while still living in our own truth. You just have to find what that is and rewrite what that is.
All it took was a deeper conversation, I agree, and we eventually got there. But it made me realize in that moment was that, oh man, like if we both just gave up there and went, oh fine, this is it, we could have just gone, well, this is it, then we can't be together anymore, blah, blah, and walked away. But we both went, no, why are we here? Like we both were frustrated that we'd got to that feeling again, and we were trying to understand why. And I remember in another heated comment, I just kept saying like, no, I was trying to keep a really low tone of voice. And it's like, I'm trying to understand, like, and it was just that, because this is
coming
obviously
at it
both,
from a curious
we were both
perspective.
so emotionally charged by this reaction. It was trying to get there. Yeah. So that is living in truth, and it's not easy, and it's part of the whole process, we realize, but it seems to save a lot of the heartache, the pain, the misery, and our relationship since living in truth. Although you're right, we've had some intense communication, maybe. At the same time, I felt a depth of love for you I've never felt, and a connection that I've never felt to anyone.
It's
that has to add for something, I think. Yeah,
created not only a self-healing journey, hasn't it, but it's also created In a way, I suppose the things that fairy tales try to portray, and I don't mean the whole
Not the Disneyfied
like
version
kiss
necessarily,
a
but
dead
yeah.
woman and you wake up freaky stuff, but I mean the happy ever after doesn't
Mm.
mean we can't sit here and say we're going to be together forever. But if we're living in truth, I don't see why we wouldn't be.
Yes,
in
it'd be
that
very
sense.
hard.
Or we would find a way to live in truth forever together because we constantly renegotiate the rules of our relationship to fit what we want at the time. And if that means being fluid in areas where before we had unhealthy boundaries or strict boundaries, as long as that's where we're at and what we're wanting, then in that moment the truth is in alignment for both of us, then those rules change. And when we're 80, those rules probably will be very different to where they are now. But as long as we're evolving together in truth,
it's very hard to see what can break you as well in truth. This was what I realized after a while was, yes, you get to choose, that's the Phoenix part of it, but then your relationship becomes so strong when you're living in truth that nothing externally can really start to cause damage.
There's been tests for sure.
No, totally. But you realize because you can talk to the truth quicker, like because you can be open and honest in truth, you get to the real genuine answer of a problem quicker. And like you said, what would actually cause us to break up? We would have to act in ways like we were before, where there was omissions of truth, where there were lies.
Well, I was going to say that there's one thing that would cause that, and that is to not live in truth.
That's what I'm saying. But that's not living in truth then.
Against truth, isn't
exactly.
it? That would be the one thing.
And that's the only answer I've come up with is the only way it would break would be if it was ever not lived in truth. Now, and also, what does that mean? Because we've talked about this, what if something happens that we know might be at the edge of a boundary, but could be communicated.
We have a rule, don't we?
But
we have communication rules.
Yeah, well, it's exactly. And we even had to kind of, even though they might be, because it could be that it's not an appropriate time to bring something to someone until maybe a day or two has passed. But again, even that we said, have these conversations. Yeah, what is the new? Yeah. Even if you can sound like a really absurd,
scenario.
Yeah, scenario. Like when were they ever? I don't know. But it's like that thing, isn't it? Well, what if such and such walked into a thing? Could I, go with, people make the lists about who they'd sleep with or whatever.
That's like our friends.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That was the essay. Yeah. But you're right. But like those sort of you're right. And people, because those are in the jokey sense. People having those lists of people you could sleep with if they're fit, and they're always celebrities or whatever. But the reality is, well, what if you actually genuinely had terms and conditions, is it was want of a better word?
Sounds very 50 Shades.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, yes, but at the same time, it's about being explicit, isn't it? It's about knowing what you want, knowing what you need.
What are the boundaries?
Sharing that explicitly, having boundaries and nuances in your communication, in your relationship. And that, in a nutshell, I suppose, is what living in truth is. But that takes continuous renegotiation.
Yes, and I think that's the smaller scale of it, isn't it? Although we had the larger sort of wider scale ceremony where the grand reset, if you will, into kind of this way of thinking.
Which I think most people need because it's a shift. It's an absolute shift.
Yeah, and I also think those are the annual sort of reviews. No, the annual reviews and reflections, how am I sticking on to this or not? Yeah, and then there's the continuous, you just go through this cycle genuinely as it ebbs and flows through life. Life will throw different challenges at you, as it moves on.
So I think if anyone is wanting to make change or has hit a point where you can't go on as you are, and I mean, we look at the divorce statistics at the moment in the UK, well, across the world, but in the UK, they're just increasing significantly at a ridiculous rate. So if you get to that point, I mean, what have you got to lose from trying it, for one? But there has to be a point of reset, is what I was trying to get at there, is you can't just slip into living in truth, because the truth at that point is so loaded with connotations, emotions, hurt, pain. There has to be a band-aid rip-off, so to speak, point done in reverence, so that you can move on and so that you can choose what you want to move forward, and then you can live in truth.
I think that was also even though when we did the ceremony, it was so intuition, and I literally just went with what felt right. Because I knew I was delivering something that was going to be uncomfortable. When you asked me, is there, because I think we were trying to come, before we formalized this process, we were just trying to live in each way that, you're right, didn't have these lies and omissions. And you asked me about some past behavior that I thought, if I don't tell you this, then I'm not living in truth. But it seemed, and it was something like long ago. It was that sort of like, oh, but I knew it would then cause a cascade of things that I couldn't. And that was just, so I went with complete intuition about this and just thought I need to give it reverence and space, because I knew, as you say, the Band-Aid thing, I was about to cause pain. So it's like, how can you do that in a controlled way where it's not, you're right, like when somebody's already heightened in
a
emotion.
safe way more than a
Safe way.
controlled way.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. Safe way. Yes. Because you're right, choosing to do that at a moment when you are maybe really heightened in emotion would be a terrible choice. Whereas doing it, with reverence, meditative space where, candlelight back to back. So there was even that, you don't have to make eye contact with me when,
But that goes back to allows you to privacy, because privacy to process emotion when someone's watching you is really difficult. And maybe I'm just speaking for me there, but I think people will resonate with that.
No, I think it, again, I'm trying to think what influenced me. And it was probably just the idea of, in a psychologist's couch where they don't face, it was just that concept. We're back to back in a meditative position. I don't know where the inspiration came from, if that's the word, best use of word, but you know what I mean? Like,
but it's whatever feels safe for you, isn't it? That was our experience of it, and it worked for us. But whatever the need is for you to feel safe to have that conversation with somebody,
that initial truth
and everyone's
revealing.
situation is different, isn't it? I mean, the things that we had to speak about and share are going to be very different for everybody involved.
Yes, and that was also the initial ceremony. And like you said, it then took us 5 to 6 days of difficult conversations and lots of tears and lots of tissue boxes. Before we actually were able to then do the closing,
and that's what I mean.
Oh yeah, like I was almost underestimated how much. You're right, like almost naively. Maybe it's because to me I had moved through some of this stuff, but in revealing it to you, what you told me was like it was fresh. It had just happened to you. I was like, of course it would be. Like, you've just heard the devastating thing, which you knew had happened as a feeling, but didn't know what it was back then. And then you were told the entire facts, everything, like pretty much all the details. No, I'd say not pretty much. You did have all the details, because I couldn't keep, this is the thought every time I think, if I don't give the full picture, it's like, well, then I'm not living in truth, am I? Like, and that's not, again, I suppose this was also the first time I did it. Like, I could have maybe said things a bit slicker that weren't as harsh as they were, but at the same time, it was the lesson it was. And I think that process of coming through that, as you say, and it took 5-6 days, and then the closing of it was just to give a space to say, that's the truth. This is a line. That was the past version of myself.
I choose to move forward.
I choose to move forward. Yeah,
and this is how we choose to live.
Yeah, and I think that was also to kind of put a seal on the that was to draw the line and say anything beyond this point, if it's not done in this way, passes that line. And you're right, and there's no more.
Well, we rewrote the boundaries. We rewrote explicitly what our truths and our acceptances were with each other. And from that closing kind of ceremony we did, or that closing space of time, however you want to call it,
it all
was from this point forward, these are our explicit expectations of each other. And if they are breached, then you know what the consequences are. And we talk about these things and they're aired, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, yes. So hopefully
it's hard.
It is hard, yes. And
powerful.
So hopefully you've kind of grasped the concept of what we're trying to get, across here, and this process of, working through this. And like Kate said, having people you can talk to about this stuff, I agree, would be useful. And that's what hopefully we're here for anyone who's listening and wants to try living in truth. It's terrifying and also
you can't go
liberating.
back. I'm not sure try living in truth is the thing, because once you do it and you see the power of it, you can't ever go back. Okay. But
there's other phrases they say about that too. But yeah.
Well, I don't think you can in truth, not in what you're talking about, but in truth, I don't think you can, because you see the power of it.
Yeah, no, I totally. It's
life changing.
Yeah. It is, yeah. Yes, I think it's because you realise, the power of it, and you can get what you want quicker and easier in many areas of life, not just your relationship, like in your business, like you just stop doing the things that you think, why am I doing that? I was there were things we're doing in our relationship you think you're doing for the other person, and you go, you're not doing that for me. It's part of that. Or even ones we say, you just misassociate. You're like, oh, I was doing the dishes for you. No, you weren't doing the dishes for me. You're doing it for the household. Like, oh yeah, just realigning thought processes of what, like, where you may have been. And I think that's all it does, is just you iron out a lot of the guesswork that we seem to do, and I think we have to do to fill in the blanks sometimes, especially when you meet, we met many years ago when we were teenagers, but if you've just met someone and you don't know them, then yeah, you do have to maybe fill in some of those blanks. And if you're somebody who's been in lots of relationships before you get to know each other, then of course you're going to bring all that baggage with you. So,
And this is all we're trying to do with, interrupting patterns of generational trauma means exactly that. Like, we observed a lot of these patterns in our own parents and society, and we're trying to teach our own children how to live their relationships in truth from the start, because it makes it a hell of a lot easier and causes a lot less pain. And their relationship still won't be perfect, but it causes a lot less pain in the long run.
Well, yes, I think the world needs more truth at the moment, and that doesn't mean being blunt and harsh with it all the time. It means using that tool that's powerful in very clever ways, I suppose. So thanks for listening, everyone. And if you want to reach out to us, check out our website, journeytounion.co.uk. And thanks for listening.